And hello, Hearts of Oak. Thanks so much for joining us once again. It's great to have the only funeral director I actually know, and that is John O'Looney. John, thanks
Mhm.
so much for your time again.
You're most welcome. It's lovely to be back on and have a chat with you, Peter.
Good to have a chat and catch up with you. And I remember vividly whenever I went to see your workplace and showing me around, and you were very generous with your time then. So always appreciate people who give their time willingly and free because
Well, I
you
think the older you get, mate, the more you realise the true meaning
yeah.
of it being better to give than to receive, and it's such an important. We're not talking about the weather or holidays or doing kitchens or, we're talking about saving lives here from a terrible biblical tyranny.
No, yeah. I saw a tweet that you'd put up, a retweet recently, and maybe fits into how you've seen what's happened with your life and about whistleblowing. So Victoria, the uncensored midwife. Again, these
Mm,
we end up following people, engaging with people. Often we never meet,
yeah.
but you follow them. And she said, "I worked full time since I was 15 years old, pay tax and national insurance. I'm now 42, unemployed. Career suicide for whistleblowing as an exemplary midwife on maternity safety." Um, Tell us about whistle because we kind of think there are protections for people to speak truth. I think we've seen during the tyranny over the last 4 or 5 years that actually a lot of those can be removed in an instant.
Yeah, of course. So whistleblowing, it's like having any kind of safety net system, isn't it? And I cast my mind back. My son was an IVF baby, and back in the day, I was 42 when we had my son, and we had 2 rounds of IVF. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent to make a point, but the first round was publicly funded. And I've never been out of work. I've always paid into the system. I've never signed on once, so I'm perfectly entitled to that, and I feel justified in doing so. So the cost of it at the time was about £5,000, and that was funded. They would only fund 1 round, but you could appeal against that for a second funding at the time. And so there was a system in place for that appeal. And I remember appealing, and as part of the appeals process, you have dialogue with the people you're appealing to. And I actually asked them at one point because it became very apparent early on that they weren't going to fund a second go at it. So I ended up funding it out of my own pocket. We saved the money. But I remember asking them, and I said, how many appeals have been successful? And she said, none. And I said, well, why do you have an appeals process? She said, because we have to have one. And that's what the policy around whistleblowers is. They have to have one because inevitably, and it was highlighted more recent years prior to COVID with the what was the doctor's name? The GP that was killing people.
Oh, yes.
You know the one I mean.
I know the one. We'll
Yeah,
come up with it later as we
yeah, of
talk.
course. So he was a rogue GP, and part of what they brought in to stop that ever happen again. And to be honest with you, if we don't mention his name, it's probably a good thing because he's a scumbag and should be forgotten. Is my gut feeling, but hey ho. That they brought in cremation paperwork on the back of that. Um, uh, I can't, and I can't remember the year it was brought in, but the idea being that another GP, independent GP, would look at the recent history of that patient and the circumstances surrounding the death and sign off to say that he felt there was nothing untoward. And it would be two GPs that would do that independently of each other. And that was brought in literally because of that. Harold Shipman, his name was. I'm going to
Yes.
say it at once. And they've pulled both of those safety nets in recent years since COVID. The first one was pulled in 2020, and the idea being was to streamline the process a little bit, I think, and to protect the NHS. We were told, so they cut it down from 2 lots of paperwork to one paperwork. Well, that's half the effectiveness of the safety net you know. And then in September of 2024, they pulled the second part, and they made another of number of other revisions as well. And part of that was quite interesting because that's come to light in recent months. So there are two types of death. There's a sudden death, and there's an expected death. Now, clearly, with a sudden death, That's unexpected, and you would expect the coroner to get involved to ascertain the cause of that death, to give the family some closure, and also find out if there's been a crime committed or malfeasance, um, committed, mistakes made in hospital, perhaps, that could be chased and people held accountable, or changes made to stop it happening again. And clearly, where there's an expected death, you don't need the coroner involved. Now, the coroner, the way it works is somebody would attend a sudden death, um, inevitably a doctor to certify that death, and then he would call police, or police would attend, and they would then refer to the coroner, because it's a sudden death. But I started to get called out, to sudden deaths, and I'm not contracted to the coroner. So the way it works is, where coroners don't employ funeral directors, they don't have their own funeral team to recover deceased. That's done on the whim of the police. They refer to the coroner, and he has someone that he has a contract with. So it's usually a big funeral provider in an area, because they have the resources to attend multiple deaths. Because you'd be surprised how many people die suddenly, especially now, for obvious reasons. And but I keep getting called out to these coroner's removals, because I haven't got a coroner's contract. It's a company locally called HW Masons who do it in Milton Keynes. And now, I I suppose I've attended about half a dozen in the last 5 or 6 months. One a month. That's too many. One is too many. Because I shouldn't be attending them. It's potential crime scene. That should be conveyed straight from the place of death to the coroner's office, which is situated at the hospital. Now, after number five, number six, and I kept ringing the coroner the next day and saying, "Listen, I've got a family here who've lost a loved one. They've got no idea why. Why are you calling me out to these?" And anyway, I emailed the coroner and put a great in-depth email, saying the reasons why I shouldn't be attending, which are obvious. Even to an untrained person should know why I shouldn't attend a coroner's removal. I also seed in Thames Valley Police, the local police, and a couple of other people, just for clarity. So that puts pressure to get a response. I had a response back. And I'm going to read it. I take the time to actually read it to you. Let's have a little looky and see if I can find it. Right. So I received a reply on. I'm going to put my glasses on because I'm old and blind now. And it says as follows: it was on Friday, the 23rd of May, from the local coroner's office here in Milton Keynes. Dear John, I acknowledge receipt of your email raising concerns on the process for initial reports of sudden deaths. The government introduced new operational guidelines in September of 2024 following the death certification reform. Now, that's total news to me. As a funeral director, I was totally unaware, but it does explain why I'm now suddenly having to attend sudden deaths in the last 5, 6 months. That makes total sense, because this is new legislation the government have introduced. It's new operational guidelines. But they didn't tell us. They just ushered it in very quietly, so quietly that we weren't told. I've attached a link for those guidelines for your information, and I can forward that to you. Thames Valley Police since issued a directive to their officers to meet these guidelines. So, where a police would attend a sudden death, and obviously by the time they've attended, that person has passed away and is laying on the floor, often with rigor mortis set in. Uh, um, I've yet to meet a police officer with a doctorate in pathology or any sort of qualification medically other than basic first aid, and also x-ray vision to be able to see the inside of that person. And we're not talking about people that are 70, 80 years old. These are people 30s, 40s, and 50s that are dying suddenly at home. I'm picking them up from their living room floors or a settee or wrapped round the toilet. They've died suddenly. There is no reason why. The families come into me, we sit, we arrange, and they're asking me why their mum or dad have died, because they've not been given any answers. But the police are following these guidelines, and they're not referring to the coroner if they think there's nothing untoward. So, say for example, they turn up and a paramedic's there because the doctor's not there, but a paramedic's there, and they say, "Yeah, it looks like a heart attack." They're happy to go with that, and they just instruct the family to ring a funeral director. That's absolutely mental, and that's literally just come in the last few months. Now, what is the end result of that? Well, clearly, where there's a murder, those murders will they'll get away with it, won't they? Because nobody is looking. And also, it should be noted that these people have no comorbidities. They have no history of heart conditions, but have died of a heart attack in their 40s. Just dropped down dead. And these are not morbidly obese people I'm picking up. These are people that externally look healthy and fit and a decent weight, etc., etc. And it's been a complete surprise to their family. So clearly, something has changed in government where they feel the need to keep the number of coroners' referrals down. Now, if there were more and more sudden deaths, uh, um, record numbers, they would all be referred to the coroner. If they're instructing police officers on the back of government operational guidelines, only just come in, that they don't refer the numbers. Those numbers are then not counted. They get waved through as normal, regular deaths. And that's what's happening. So I replied to the coroner and said, listen, and again, I included in Thames Valley Police and said, we all know the exact reason why. We know what that's going to be the outcome. People are going to be waved through who have died suddenly as a result of vaccine deaths. It's to hide the number of coroner's referrals because the amount of people that are dying suddenly now is so exponentially growing that the only way they can hide it is just not refer to the coroner. And they're using the police's discretion to do that. So the way that works is if you had 10 people that died from a heart attack at home, right? And you had police officers attend and paramedics attend, and they worked on them for an hour, trying to bring them back, but failed. How many out of those 10 would be happy that it is a heart attack and would be its way through? And remember the state they're in. They're traumatized, they're grieving, and they say, well, we know it's a heart attack, it's a natural death. You don't want the coroner to pull them about, do you? And they're being coerced and nudged into not even wanting to see the coroner. It's absolute disgrace. And the coroner is not at fault because they're not getting the referral from the police officers. And that's what this email says, basically. It said Thames Valley Police issued a directive to their officers to meet these government guidelines. And that's why I keep getting called out to sudden deaths, because the coroner's crew are not getting called because the police are not referring. I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, it does. It does,
Yeah,
and you kind of think of many, many not industries, but areas of profession that connect with
yeah,
what
yeah,
has
yeah.
happened over the
Well,
last
well,
few
I'm
years.
I'm a very small family-run funeral director. I probably do 150, 160 funerals a year. So as you can imagine, the bigger players in the industry, your co-op funeral cares, your dignities, your funeral partners who command vast swathes of the market will be picking up loads of people off their living room floors, loads of people off their settees in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. They all know it's the worst kept secret. In fact, I had a very interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with a funeral director based in Gloucester. I think his name was Ben or Sam, I can't remember. But the way that transpired was I had a woman get in touch with me, and she asked me to embalm her father. She said he'd gone into a care home. They'd vaccinated him 7 times over the period that he was in there. That was despite her saying, "I don't want him vaccinated." They just did it anyway. They don't care. They don't care. They're bumping these people off. So I said, yeah, if your father's conveyed to me, I'll be happy to embalm him and look and see if there are any clots present, and I get loads of requests to do that. So
And you're saying what 30-35%
yeah, 30, 35
of
percent
plots.
roughly. So um, I then took a phone call from the undertaker in Gloucester that was looking after her father, and he was flapping. She went to school with this guy, and he openly admitted the vaccines are killing people privately to her. He won't do it in an email. They won't do it by talking about it online. So anyway, he rang me up and I kind of said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm just wondering, what is there any point in, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is, no, not really. Because if I find those clots and I give them to her, where is she going to go? The coroners would never admit it. They'll say it's just normal natural clots. I worked for the coroner for 7 years. It's not. I've been a funeral director for 18 years. It isn't normal. These clots that we're constantly finding inside people, and that's 4 different people there. They're not normal. They're not normal. They are killing people. That's what's going on. It's the worst kept secret. I've been in groups of a dozen funeral directors and embalmers from across the globe who are all openly talking about it. I've been tapped on the shoulder at the local crematorium, and they said to me, well done for speaking out. And I was kind of say, okay, well, what about you saying something? And they look at the floor and shuffle their feet. Anyway, this guy, I kind of said to him, I said, well, what do you expect? I said, we're in year 5 now. I said, people are dropping down dead suddenly in record numbers for no reason at all. I said, and people are beginning to see through the lie. And he said, yes, yes, I know. And I said, okay. I said, well, if you know, why haven't you said anything then? It makes no sense. I said, because what you've done now, you've dug yourself a really deep fucking hole. I said, because how long do you keep a secret for before you're complicit in the crime?
Yeah.
And he had nothing to say. Where could he go with that? So I said, and as people realize what's been done and listen to what I and other people have said, what are you going to tell them when they start venting their fury at you? You could have saved thousands of lives by just being honest, but you've betrayed all of your community by saying nothing. And he had nothing to say because he had nothing to. He had no defense. So that's kind of where we are now. Now, inevitably, I'm not getting called out every night because I've got a very, and I suspect these people, they'll attend the scene and they'll probably recommend certain funeral directors, and that perhaps won't be me because they know I will talk openly about the wrong that is happening there. But that's what it is. It's government operational directive, and I will forward you the email for you to have a look, and you can verify that. Obviously there might be some details on there I would
Mm.
ask you to admit, or I'll delete the details of
Yeah, yeah.
this individual before I send it to you. But it's absolutely disgusting. I can remember a time not that long ago. Pre-COVID, if you died suddenly, it doesn't matter what age you are, you would have no choice, no say in the matter. That coroner would do a post-mortem, except in extremely rare cases where perhaps you were terminally ill with cancer and perhaps had hemorrhaged and bled out, or, and it was an expected death. But now they're just waving them through. Why are they waving them through? Because they want to hide the number of deaths.
People, because you've spoken, I mean, you're very well known now, but you look in your Twitter account's only been open 4 years, so you
Mm.
were just head down, getting on with your
Yeah,
life,
I've never been
doing your
a social
business.
media man. I've
No.
I've never have. I've never done interviews before COVID, but I felt compelled to do so because I saw not only a great evil with what was going on, but the official reaction denying it all and gaslighting. And we saw exact same thing with thalidomide, but on a far lesser scale. These jabs are still killing people to this day. They're lining up. And of course, once their health begins to fall over, as it is as happening and as was predicted, they need more and more protection because they're vulnerable. These people are all going to die who are taking these jabs endlessly. They are going to die.
And of course, the kind of when people have seen you speak, we've had you on a number of times, you connected me with Richard Hirschman, had him on as well,
They're a good
talking
guy,
about.
gentlemen.
But what is, because people think, well, kind of, look, John, this is, we've kind of been through this, and maybe there was some negative side, and kind of we've moved on. But yet, even this week, I mean, in the 2 headlines, the Independent today, as we record this Monday, a few days before it goes out,
Mm.
why has there been a global surge of new COVID variant NB181? And then another one from Friday, new coronavirus discovered in China, only small step from infecting humans, discovered in bats, still on about bats. But
Well,
anyway,
it's
so
it's
yeah,
very it's very interesting. So the reality is I haven't seen a COVID labeled death in my funeral home for 3 years.
Wow.
They've I'm not sure on the situation as regards monetizing it now like they had, where they were paying vast thousands of pounds for each COVID that went on a death certificate. I suspect that is ended, and the reason for that is they're not putting COVID on the death certificates. You know, there is no COVID deaths. There's no COVID deaths. If there were, I would be seeing them labelled as COVID deaths. We would be urged to be cautious and all the same bullshit we had before. I think they know people are not buying it. So I remember watching a video of Bill and Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation, who are right at the heart of this. These fucking sociopathic scumbags,
Yeah.
and he was absolutely gushing with delight at the prospect of the next one. He said, "You'll take notice of the next one." So clearly, Bill Gates may be many things, but he betrayed himself in his excitement, and clearly they have something else planned. Whether that's over 5G and to affect people that are full of graphene oxide, or whether that's through new gain of function research, I really don't know, but I don't doubt that there is something else in the pipeline, in the plans for them, because they are the. There's a few pointers, but one of the interesting pointers, and if you look for things, they reveal themselves. So politically, here in the UK, Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, even Rees-Mogg, all of them keep on saying about the need to leave the ECHR and the need for human rights law reform. Now, these people work on a problem solution system. So they're creating the problem by deliberately shipping in thousands and thousands of young men every month of fighting age from foreign lands. They then tout that the only way we can get rid of them is to end their human rights. So we need to leave the ECHR and we need human rights law reform. And many people will, of course, agree without realizing they're actually removing their own human rights, because the law in this country applies to everyone in this country, whether you're an illegal immigrant or whether you're a citizen. So people they're gonna find that life is made so unbearable for them, they'll agree to forfeit their human rights in the hope that these people will be shipped out. And the reality is they're never going to be. They are our replacements, and they are here to police us. They're UN soldiers, is what they are, the young lads.
No, they are. But I want to pick up. You mentioned about reform and
Yeah,
Nigel and Tyson, all that. And I've talked to a number of people who have tried to get through to Nigel to point out
they're bought and
about
paid
this,
for.
and they just will not touch it. And you think,
Richard Tice and Nigel Farage are both bought and paid for. Richard Tice is best friends in real life with Matt Hancock. People are not aware of that. Matt Madazalam, the murdering scumbag Hancock. Don't think, but of course, Reform is a political party full of people with the best intentions, except for the head of the snake.
yeah,
They're bought and paid for, and I've got that on good authority, and I could go into great detail. I haven't seen the evidence, but I've heard the evidence from a German diplomat friend of mine, and also a former MP.
mm,
So they're all bought and paid for. If voting really made any difference, we wouldn't be allowed to do it. We wouldn't be allowed to do it. There is no democracy. Now, and to illustrate that more fully, when I was in Westminster in Birdcage Walk meeting of September 2021, and I heard a plethora of overwhelming evidence warning Sir Graham Brady, who was at that time, he was the commissioner
yeah,
of the 1922 committee. So this is a man who headed the commission that hire and fire prime ministers. So he's two pay grades above the prime minister. And I never realized that. I wasn't aware. You know, you see Keir Starmer, you think he's in charge. He has no power whatsoever. He is a puppet. He is a white square. He's there for people to focus at and to announce the new policy. He isn't in charge. Well, I listened as a guy 2 pay grades above him admitted to a room of 18 of us um, is way, way above my pay grade. So it was 2 pay grades at least above Sir Graham's. Well, who runs the country then? There is no democracy. There's no one to vote for. And as long as people continue to vote, They're wasting their time. They're giving a mandate to these scumbags because they cover all the bases. They own every political party of any substance, with the exception of the odd independent that you get. They're never going to get elected. They're never going to form a government.
No, no. And the ex-MP you mentioned probably fits with Andrew Bridgen
Yeah,
model
of
of
course.
someone
Yeah,
who is
he's
so
he
vocal.
knows. Yeah, he
I know.
knows. He knows the seriousness of the situation, and it is what it is, And nobody wanted to be wrong more than me,
Yeah. No, no.
But I knew that
Agreed.
I wasn't. I was sat at the meeting. I remember sitting there and thinking, "Fuck, how did I get here?" Because it's really, really heavy,
Yeah.
especially when you cast your mind back to what life was like in September of 2021. So to then come out and say, no, you're all wrong. And I've heard it from the horse's mouth. People didn't want to believe it. They believe it now. Oh, I've got my phone is red hot constantly with people saying, we see it now. We see it now. It's too late. It's too late. Whatever these people have been injected with is in them, and that's it. And
Exactly.
they said years 2 to 5 post vaccine, they will all die if they've had an active ingredient, and we're in year 4.
Yeah.
So there's another 12 months of madness to go, and that's why they're not doing the coroner's referrals, because they know the bulk of deaths is going to be in the next 12, 18 months.
Tell us what it's like for you being a in your profession as an undertaker and seeing these deaths because we've talked. I mean, David Cortland, of course, we've engaged with, and you've whistleblowers in the medical
Yeah,
profession who actually think, well, we see something wrong, we need to actually work and maybe help those patients
yeah,
because
yeah,
they're
yeah. Of course.
alive, and you've got all of that. Undertakers maybe aren't known for people who speak out, and the person is dead, so it's past the point you can help the individual there, and there's no point in telling the family because
Well, it's
yeah.
quite strange, yeah, because I know when I first started this job 18 years ago, you do feel as though you've been let into the fold, and there's a brotherhood
Yeah.
and a general feeling of wanting to care for people. And since COVID, I feel quite isolated because these people that all pretended to care do not give a fuck about the public.
Mm,
They can walk in front of the hearse with their hat and bow and look all solemn. They don't give a fuck. I know they don't, because they see what I see. They've openly admitted it to me, yet they still say nothing. Why have they done that? I suspect for money. I think some of them are in lodges where they've taken vows of silence. Some of them are frightened about the effect it might have on their business. And if you think about it logically, when I know certainly through 2021, when people were coming to me and they were told in the hospital their mum and dad had died from COVID, and the reality wasn't that they poisoned them to death with remdesivir and drugs like that, or put them on ventilation they never needed. How can you suddenly, it could be very damaging to suddenly say, I don't think there was a COVID as a funeral director. It's kind of disingenuous to those families. But I generally don't believe there was any significant COVID threat. I think it was malfeasance in the hospitals primarily, and now it's the vaccines that are killing people. And it was a very, very clever psyop, the whole thing, with unlimited resources. I mean, Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, have given the BBC, for example. I've seen reports of 400 million now.
mm.
So there, and then you listen to the news and it's sponsored by Pfizer. What news do you think these people are going to be telling? They're going to be telling exactly whatever string is pulled on their
Well,
little.
it was the pharma industry were the big advertisers during
Yeah, of
COVID,
course.
and they
Yeah, of
kept
course
all
it
the
was.
newspapers going, so why
Uh,
would you criticize your biggest
well,
advertiser?
you're not allowed to, because otherwise that money would dry up or you'd lose your job, and they put another puppet in who would do what they're told, and that's what happened. But it was very. I mean, it's very it's strange, because I've had these conversations with people, and I've said to them, "Why don't you say nothing?" And the geezer in Gloucester, he said to me, "Well, it's difficult, isn't it?" And I, what? How is it fucking difficult when people are dying and you're pulling this crap? No, it ain't difficult. Not for me, but
Yeah.
I've got a moral compass. And that's obviously different. I'm totally different to him, where he values his money, and he'll take the money and he won't say anything to anyone. They're embalming people, putting this unnatural crap out of them, and not saying nothing, and still invoicing them. It's the most awful betrayal. And when the public find out about the betrayal that these upstanding community members have done to their individual communities. All you funeral directors, you all know what's been going on. You must know that the truth is coming out. Not saying anything about a terrible danger to your communities is a betrayal of your communities. The communities that probably look up to you and respect you, they're not going to in the coming days. I would urge you to step out now before you end up with lynch mobs after you personally. I think that will happen because if I knew, for example, if I lost my mum and dad and my son was terribly ill and my wife disabled from a stroke, and how would you feel when the truth came out about the people in the industry who knew when I've been shouting for 5 years and none of them has said a word?
Oh,
There's going
exactly.
to be a great deal of resentment. So it is what it is. I'm still here.
Yeah.
They ain't bumped me off yet. So there's no reason stopping anyone else from talking out apart from greed. Greed. All
Let
about money.
here let and yes, and but we were saying before I've had disagreements with friends who, as doctors, they took the money and they
Yeah, of
believed
course.
it could have been damaging, and actually they didn't get family done, but they
Well,
carried on for
one of the
people for
most
money.
telling things was the COVID vaccine uptake this year in the NHS.
Mm.
83% refusal.
Wow, wow, wow.
83% of people on the cold face of COVID and any risk there may or may not be. 8.3 out of every 10 said no, thank you. Why do people think that is? And I spoke to doctors and I've spoke to nurses who have said all my colleagues are dying around me. They're all retiring early on a sick with strokes and heart attacks and myocardia. And it is what it is. It is what it is. There's not much we can do without getting the numbers. And the only way we can get the numbers is by telling the truth and rallying those numbers together. And the reality is the people who believe this lie are getting sick and they're dying. So I kind of can't waste energy on them. I'm thinking about more about the future for those that I've got a future who haven't been poisoned yet.
What about the truth coming out, the truth being told of those who have carried out this of being punished? I mean, what's happening in the US with Bobby Kennedy does seem to actually genuinely want to make Americans healthy again.
Yeah.
Hugely suspicious of the big farm industry and of the big food industry.
He's a lot
So
more than suspicious, I tell you.
yeah,
So
well, putting it mildly.
I spoke to RFK Jr. for at least 2 hours
Yep,
about 3.5 years ago.
yep,
He knows what these vaccines are doing. He knows, but there's a game that needs to be played and a way to play it. And ultimately, do you know what it is? Public opinion, and it is the truth. Once people know the truth, they're collectively there's too many of them to take us all out. It's going to be, and I think that's perhaps why they've got the Samson protocol and they're ramping up the wars because I think if they thought they were going to lose their seat of power
yep.
globally, and that's what will happen when everyone globally finds out what's been done, I suspect they'll have a scorched earth policy to try and bump most of us off.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, look, when I saw the announcement a few weeks ago about COVID jobs being taken off the childhood list,
Yeah, of
and then I
course.
saw criticism from others to say, "Oh no, you must ban it completely." But you realize there is a step by step, and
Yeah,
he's
of
just
course
in
there
that
is.
position.
And the clue is in the numbers and the truth. It's very much like sitting in. Have you ever been on holiday in a swimming pool and you've been playing ball and you hold that ball underwater?
Yeah,
That is the truth.
yeah,
How long can you hold it under the water before it just has to come up, doesn't it? And it will. And I know I'm going to be on the right side of history, whether I'm here or not to see it. It don't really matter. But I feel very privileged to have been a small cog in a big machine that's going to bring these bastards down, and it will. And they will be held accountable. Many of them will disappear. I suspect that many of them will be fake deaths. And the reality is, you'll probably never know who was really responsible above the Faucis and above the Gates. And, they've got puppet masters, haven't they? And that's what the Masonic black and white squares are for. They're the white squares, the ones you can see. The ones in the background, the black squares, we'll probably never know who they are. And for their sakes, I hope people never find out because I would be all for seeing them receive the sentence that's appropriate to the crime.
yeah. How do you think, because obviously the court, we see the courts being complicit in this.
Yeah, they're maritime
Yeah,
courts. They're not common law courts.
yeah.
It needs abolishing, and I think what we're going to see eventually is a deterioration into mass civil unrest, and then I suspect the military will step in, and they're clear governments around the world, and they'll usher in a new world order. We're going to get rid of all these criminal cabals, and it's never going to happen again. And that's exactly what they wanted in the first place. Really, is the reality is a new world order, and obviously, during that transition phase, I suspect there'll be a large loss of life. And there is your, on the back of the mass poisoning and sterilization of people. And in fact, it was put to Sir Graham Brady in Westminster back in 2021 by myself and a number of other people that when the masses find out what has been done, when you understand that your families have been poisoned and your kids sterilized, what do you think the reaction will be? It will be civil war. And he openly acknowledged, he said, yes, they know, and they're preparing for it. How are they preparing? They've got a standing army, haven't they? And they're building that army every month with these young lads who sign the official secrets act. People must know in their hearts, when you've got thousands and thousands of young men of fighting age only, and you've got people like Rachel Reeves deploying them in strategic places all around the country, it's not rocket science. Not at this stage. I don't think it's rocket science. These are people who have private healthcare, prepaid mobile phones, a prepaid credit card. These are not benefits. These are benefits of someone who's gainfully employed, and they're employed. And I've seen videos of some of them openly admitting they're working with the British military. It's not rocket science. It's just I wonder at what point they're going to make their final move. And I do wonder if they'll perhaps try and mandate it come door to door. If they can remove us from the ECHR and they can modify human rights laws and they can sign that WHO treaty, are they going to come door to door and try and poison us all in our own homes? I really don't know. Time will tell, won't it? And I suspect that will be civil war then, because I would fight to the death because it would be a life or death situation. I'm not having them poisons ever inside my body, and I say that as a man who puts people in coffins for a living. I know, I know who's dying. It's the vaccinated.
Now, you, like many others, you've been extremely outspoken, but
I've got
you,
no choice because
but but but
they'll kill us all.
But I'm assuming that you don't have a huge pile of cash. I know from us
No, I
talking.
don't.
So
No, I
it's
don't.
not as if you have any other alternative. It's not, if this doesn't work out, you can go and live in your country house
No,
and you can go
no.
to your yacht.
I've got
So
but
yeah,
what
th-
good is money in the world these people want for us anyway? I mean, they've openly said by 2030 you'll own nothing and be happy. So if
but
I can grin and bear it for another 200 weeks,
but tell me what, like, because there must have been points when you thought, actually, I'll need to go and find something else, because if the more I speak up, the more the more I put my head above the parapet,
mm,
then the authorities will come after me, whether it's the regulatory bodies in the funeral professions, or and I'll have to just find something else to do. How
well,
did those thoughts go through your head?
it's very interesting because you've
And they're
had.
still going through your head,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, of course. So we've had water inspections, funeral home inspections, and the governing bodies are not governing bodies; they're advisory bodies. But then they come out with fake stories like the whole based funeral firm, Legacy Funerals, I think they were called, and that was a totally fake story. So the story was that, and I'll explain how I know it was fake, right? And the clue, as always, is in the numbers. So with Legacy Funerals in Hull, the story was that they weren't doing the funerals properly, weren't disposing of the bodies. They pulled 34 deceased off site, um, and this was a funeral director that had three funeral homes and he'd been running 13 years. Okay. So to put that into context, I've done 8 years here. I've got one funeral home. The turnover of my business is about between three and 400,000 turnover, not profit. And I'm not particularly mercenary, so I don't make loads of money, 85, 90,000 a year, which I think is a fair wage for me and my wife and my gainfully employed guy at the back of the house. So when you go on Company's House and you look at Legacy Funerals based in Hull, Remember, I'm turning over between 300,000 and 400,000 in one branch. Legacy Funerals in Hull had three branches and had been operating for 13 years. And in 2021, during the pandemic, they made £5,000.
Oh,
When they got busted, they pulled 21 deceased, no, 34 deceased, I think was the number, from their funeral home. There's £120,000 worth of funerals there.
wow.
So the numbers were just total bullshit. So what we got there was an orchestrated story, and it was orchestrated by someone who has no knowledge of the funeral trade and to what the numbers should be that they set up on Companies House to give it credibility. Because inevitably, you must understand that when they tell a story about a funeral company, people are going to have a look because they're going to be outraged. And the outrage was what they wanted, because then that enables them to bring in new laws, new guidelines to police funeral homes. And then anyone who's seen not to be adhering and towing to the new guidelines, they can shut them down. People like me, so I've had inspections, water inspections, but yeah, you only had to look at Companies House, Legacy Funerals from Hull, and look at their books. It was total bullshit. It was a bullshit story. It was bullshit story to frighten and shut up funeral homes that were speaking out.
And I saw that just again, your X feed is a trip down memory lane sometimes when you're
Yeah, yeah, of
posting.
course it is. I
But it was
stand
but
by everything I say.
kebabs for jabs. It was the
Yeah,
front page 4 years ago, and it makes you realize how crazy the situation was and how much people were
yeah,
brainwashed through
of
fear
course.
and
Well,
will do anything.
one of the best psyops really was the clapping on doorsteps for the NHS.
Yeah.
This was why they were killing their mums and dads, putting remdesivir in them. And if you don't believe me, Google side effects of remdesivir. Bearing in mind, we were told COVID was a respiratory condition. Look at the side effects of remdesivir, the only antiviral drug they would allow administered. Difficulty breathing, wheeziness, tight chest, kidney function, liver function. It was killing people, and they knew it was killing people. If you're a nurse or a doctor on a ward and you're administering remdesivir into patients, even if you had no prior knowledge of the drug, how many outcomes do you need to see consistently before you understand this is killing people? And then to not say anything and carry on doing it, you're complicit in murder. That's the reality. But you've got people clapping on doorsteps. Hero worship for these heroes. During a deadly pandemic, they're putting themselves on the line. No, they weren't. No, they weren't. I've got hundreds of details of nurses on my phone. I've got hundreds, and some of them have cried down the phone. Most of them have left nursing now because they got in touch with me because they had a conscience. So who does that leave in there? The sociopaths, the foreign ones that have got total cultural disassociation. They don't care. Certainly on the ward that I was on, it was all African agency nurses who were just injecting the patients with whatever they were told to do. Yeah, because they're on 10 times the money. They don't understand. They don't really want to know. They're on a good number. They're doing what they're told to do. It is what it is. It is what it is, unfortunately. There are lots and lots of good people doing bad things. Why are they doing bad things? For money. And then after a certain while, they're complicit in the crime. And if you don't think your parliament is compromised, ask yourself why two-thirds of British MPs voted to retain convicted rapists from foreign countries in this. It makes absolutely no sense. Why would your own MP from your constituency vote to keep foreign rapists in this country? Convicted foreign rapists. Two-thirds of them did because they do what they're told to do, not what is right. And
Oh,
but I think ultimately the way forward now is just to let it go down the dark path it's going, with more and more draconian madness, the welcoming of young men of fighting age, the building of houses exclusively for the new arrivals, the two-tier legal and justice system that we're already seeing, and the active um, uh, chasing down of anyone who voices any discontent. That's not normal. Historically, if we look back through history, that's along the same vein as what we've been told the Nazis did. Do you know? We are living in a tyrannical dystopian dictatorship in this country. That's the reality. And these people are openly betraying the British people and its culture and its economy. They're actively destroying it. And I think people will see it, but I think they have to, and it has to get a lot darker yet for the masses to perhaps, I don't know, have a 5 minute march down the M1 and
Yeah.
descend on Westminster and force it to its end, and then I think they'll kind of say, well, we didn't get the numbers we want, but let's usher in the new world order and get rid of these criminals. And I think that's how it's naturally gonna end. Or they'll Samson it and scorched earth policy and say it's nuclear war. And I believe now, knowing what I know and speaking to the people that I spoke to, all wars are just simply extensions of the cull. That's all they are. What do they do in war? They conscript.
Yeah.
Who do they conscript? The youngest and the fittest and the best of us. And they throw them into a muddy field to throw drones at them until they're all gone. And they call it war. And they play songs like Land of Hope and Glory. It's a psyop. It's all a psyop.
Yeah.
And I remember watching videos of the armistice and the end of war. And these young lads, they've been shooting each other hours before, and they came out, they hugged each other, they cried, they'd lost their families, their homes, they'd lost brothers. They never wanted to fight. So why were they fighting? For greedy fat puppets who weren't putting their own fucking families in there.
Yeah. No,
All wars are a nonsense, they're a cull. And that is why we're still physically, 2025, we're sending people to God knows where in space, we're told, aren't we? Which I suspect is probably another lie. But telescopes to the far end of the cosmos. They can replicate all sorts of people, cloning people, and we can't stop blowing each other up and killing each other. The youngest and the fittest in 2025. Give me a break. It's a deliberate act. These are extensions of the coal, and there'll be people that are enraged by that because they're totally sucked in by the propaganda, same as they were with COVID. They're never going to believe it, and there'll be people that will go to their grave on the back of a 6-week cancer, convinced they've died because you won't have your poison.
no.
It's insane. It is, but I draw strength from knowing that I don't know everything about what's going on, but I know it's a deliberate act. It's Agenda 2030. It's the Kalergi plan.
Yeah.
They need. It's the same as on the news, the face covering thing. They're making a big fuss of. Let me tell you, that's got nothing to do with Muslims. That's got nothing to do with burqas. It's
Yeah.
about you covering your face, because if you cover your face, they cannot usher in facial recognition. If they ushered it in now, everyone would cover their face. So
Yeah.
what they're going to do is they're going to make it illegal to cover your face and call it terrorism, or the burqa, and create more racial tension there for a bit more civil unrest and a few more deaths. And it's not. It's about ushering in digital IDs and
But then they
facial
can
recognition. Yeah,
they,
so that's what it is.
then they can roll
Can
out.
you imagine a time in this country where we start jailing people for covering their faces? It's bollocks. It's absolute bollocks, but it illustrates perfectly the level of tyranny that we face unless we all come together, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and everyone, and recognize our common enemy.
Yeah. No, exactly. I've seen those live facial recognition vans pop up all
Do you know what?
over London.
I know a lot of Muslims, and they're good people. In the same way as Jewish, I've got a lot of Jewish friends. They're really good Jew. The problem is the people that hide behind the Jews. That's the bottom line. I know good Hindu people. I know they were good and bad in every walk of life, in all colors and creeds and faiths. People need to come together and recognize their common enemy.
Exactly. John, it's a privilege knowing you. One of the and first to know someone who, in their profession, is one of the only known people who actually speak truth, is a shame on our society, and that is the case. But thank you for your boldness and braveness and continue to
They'll have
speak
no
up.
choice, mate, because in the coming days, if they do decide to go door to door, what are these funeral directors going to do then? They're going to say nothing, continue to say nothing, and hold their arm out. Of course they're not. Of course they're not. But it'd be no good shouting and hollering about it when they're on your doorstep. The time to do it is now. Is now, before we go down that mad rabbit hole that's coming. So I hope that people will reconsider, and so they can live with their self and all. Do you know? but we're all different, aren't we? You know, my moral compass is clear, mate. I'll meet my maker with a clean, with confidence.
Yeah, no, as will I, and that is a call to action that everyone should heed to act now.
Oh, mate, it'd be
For
no
good life.
good trying to reason with young foreign mercenaries
Yeah,
on your doorstep and say, "Well, I'm a funeral director and I know who's dying," because they're not going to listen. They're going to kick your door in. They're going to come. You'll hear your missus screaming as they hold her down and they inject her.
yeah, no,
So
exactly.
now is the time to start shouting about it, so that collectively we can make a stand together. You know, it doesn't matter what your excuse is. You need to step out and get your moral compass and some backbone, and before it goes down that path. There's no seat on the ark for any of you, I tell you.
Well, I hope speaking to you, John, today will give some people watching a backbone that have maybe been on the sideline. So
Well, what are they going to say? What are they going to say to explain how they never saw what I've
yeah,
seen for the last 5 years? When it all comes out, and it will come out.
it will. It will. John, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking with us and giving us an update on what you're seeing. And yeah, it's an important message, and we need to continue hearing it, whatever happens. So thanks so much for today.
You're most welcome, Peter, and thank you for what you're doing, because it's a story I could look at myself in the mirror and tell myself I can't get that message out there without people like you. So thank you for playing your part, mate. You're saving lives.
Thank you.